But if you would like one, I have one. If you raise your hand, I'll make sure you get one. I got a wire here. Anybody else need one? No. All right, any more? Aha! There you go. Romans 5:12 through 21. This is considered by more people than not to be the most difficult section of the New Testament. It is the most controversial. It is the place where lots of people with differing views go to get the support for their views. So there. However, being as we like to let the Bible interpret itself, don't we? Don't we like that? Yes, we do. We might try a little of that tonight. Who knows? What's Rick doing? He's closing the other door. Thank you, sir. Bunch of people sick out there. Don't get sick. Starts off, interestingly enough, in verse 12, and has some very controversial things here. In fact, one of the most. Therefore, just as through one man sin entered into the world, he doesn't name him yet, but we all know who it is. And death through sin, so death spread to all men because all sinned. Now, those who think that we inherit Adam's sin think there are words there that aren't there that we should understand are there. Because all men sinned in Adam. But it doesn't say that. In fact, there are any number of things that would make that look questionable, even in this immediate context. So let's just try to take it at face value and say that there is one person, Adam, who is responsible for bringing sin into the world. Now, that's even technically not correct. So Adam is being used archetypically to represent a thing. Who was the first person to bring sin into the world? That's Eve. And so, but he is using Adam as an archetype, an example, a model, to represent something bigger than himself, which in this case is sin. So before Adam, using him as he is, there wasn't any sin in the world, right? Right. So with the sin in the garden, sin gets put into the world. And it says all men died. Now, some people think that this means, what has happened with this cord? What have they done? I've got my own mic. I don't need this. Leave for a week and change the whole thing. Okay. Looking at it in that sense, if it said, and death spread to all men, now if that's physical death, and all men died because they sinned, does that make any sense? Why do we die? Because we don't have the tree of life, right? So whether we sin or not, which we will, we're going to die. So there are two aspects of death that we encounter with Adam. There's also the phrase, in the day that you eat of it, you will die. And we've talked about before, I'll mention it again, that there are three subtly different Hebrew constructions in the three occasions where we find that said. Anywhere from, bam, you're dead, to you start dying, and eventually you will die. And the nuances of the start dying, you will die. Now, isn't that correct? On the day that he ate of the tree, did they start physical death? They're never going to eat of the tree of life again. God's going to make sure they can't get into the garden, put a cherubim there. I think it's interesting that on the curtains to the most holy place, they're cherubim. So people can't just go in there. Some symbolism from the garden because of sin. So, I'm ruling out that death spread to all men means all men physically died because they sinned. I'm ruling in all men spiritually died because they sinned. Okay? So that's where I want to be with verse 12. Just letting it be what it is and throwing a few things in there that hem it up as to what it could conceivably mean. Now here we start getting tricky here. Now, we want, as we look at some things that are going to be said here, for instance, we want to see if there are things that tell us what this can't mean. Because once we find something that tells us what this can't mean, guess what? It can't mean that. Okay? For until the law, and I believe this is the law of Moses, most everybody does, it has a definite article. For until the law, sin was in the world. That means from Adam's sin. Sin was in the world until the law. But sin is not imputed where there is no law. So here he says, now, has he been talking a lot about the law of Moses and the Jews and they're being enamored with it and the Gentiles don't have it and we have it and all that kind of stuff? And has he not been pointing out that, well, one of the things he points out is that everybody's a sinner. He goes to great length to say, everybody's sinned, everybody's sinned, everybody's sinned, everybody's sinned. Jews, Gentiles, everybody's sinned. He devotes screeds of verses to that. So, he has already talked about the fact that Gentiles sinned. But if this means where there is no law, there is no sin, and there was no law, he's actually talking about law of Moses, then they couldn't have sinned. I mean, if that's what he means, then that would be it. But he can't mean that because he's already said that Gentiles sinned. So, we're ruling that out. And we're talking about the law of Moses here. And the Jews would hold that over the Gentiles' head. We've got the law, and you don't. One of the things Paul is, I think, going to do, well, I know he's going to do it because he says he does, is he's going to show, okay, let's just look at that. Because if the deal is you sin and you die, you commit more sins than the Gentiles. If a Gentile eats a catfish, if they sinned, a camel, I don't know if they want to do that, but if they did, no. Wore garments made out of two different kinds of thread? No. They don't. They could wear anything they want to. Keep separate from lepers and say, unclean, unclean? No. I mean, how many laws did the law of Moses have that the Gentiles aren't have? Did the Gentiles have to have Passover? No. Day of Atonement? No. Ingather? No. There's hundreds of things that the Gentiles don't have to do, that the Jews have to do, in addition to the things that the Gentiles aren't supposed to do either. So in fact, having the law, if you're trusting in law, having the law makes you a bigger sinner than someone who doesn't have it. So one of the things he's doing, it's in the air. One of the things he's doing, he carries it along, he throws it every once in a while. He says, you Jews are talking about law. Yeah, there are advantages in it, but the way you're using it, it is a disadvantage to you because that's more for you to do. Now let's look at the end. Let's scoot to the end of the chapter here and just look at what he says here. The law came in, verse 20, so that the transgressions would increase. Well, if transgressions are increasing with the law, there must have been transgressions before the law, right? But where sin increased, so sin must have been increasing. It must have been imputed, or it wouldn't have been increasing. Grace abounded all the more, which causes them to get into this. Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound stuff? In the next chapter. So that as sin reigned in death, even so death would reign through righteousness to eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. So if we take the end of this discussion and kind of bring it in to see where it's going, what we have is this. That he's saying, before the law came, there were fewer sins. So there were sins. They were reckoned. What about the flood? I mean, if there's no law, there's no sin. It's got, man, I can't do anything about this because I don't have a law. I just got to let them go. Did he have a law? Did he have a standard? Were they sinning? Yes, of course they were. So the issue isn't, it can't be. The issue isn't that prior to the law of Moses, from Adam to the law of Moses, nobody could sin because there wasn't a law. Now, nobody could sin like Adam sinned. He is an archetypical sinner. I'm going to wear that word out. Notice what I have over here. Adam and Jesus. I left my pointer in my office. I just have to put it here. Everything else is here, so I might as well put it there too. Adam's disobedience is an archetypical thing. That's what brought sin into the world. And people died spiritually because they what? Sinned. Where did sin come from? Adam brought it into the world. This is a symbolic thing. Now, there's another archetypical person in this discussion. And who's that? Jesus. And so, obedience rather than disobedience puts you into righteousness and forgiveness and salvation and grace as opposed to sin and death. So they represent two different concepts. That Adam introduced sin into the world. And death spread to all men because all sinned. With that sin, if you will, that Adam has now brought into the world. They're kicked out of the garden and everybody's going to deal with it. Again, the flood shows there's a lot of stuff people could do wrong, and they did so much wrong that goodness knows they just flooded them out. So, there's that. Back. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even though those who had not sinned according to the law had sinned. Now, let's just look at this. Let's compare verse 13 and 14. Let's just do that. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin was not imputed where there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even though those who had not sinned in the likeness of the offense of Adam. But did they sin? Were they archetypical sinners? Were they the first? No. Did they sin? Yes. So if we just let it say what it says, it keeps us from going too far astray. And it says Adam was a what? Type of him who was to come. So, Adam is the one that in this argument he's using symbolically to represent how sin became available and that people chose it. And what happened when they made that choice? They died. It wasn't that they died physically, because they were going to die physically anyway, but spiritually. Christ comes and he's the other alternative. He brings something else into the world that people can choose rather than sin. And if they choose that, obedience, what happens? They don't die spiritually. They're saved, you see. So, okay. Here we go. But the free gift is not like the transgression. For if by the transgression of the one, the many died, why? Because all chose to sin. He's already told us that. Much more did the grace of God and the gift of the grace of the one man, Jesus Christ, abound to the many. So Jesus' gift is stronger and greater than what Adam brought into the world. So much so that not only can it wipe that off of your slate, but it can give you a status of heaven and living with God throughout all eternity and all that stuff, as opposed to the other choice, which separates you from God eternally. So Jesus brings something greater. Not only does it offset, but it more than offsets. It's far greater than the consequences of sin in what it gives us in Christ. For if by the transgression of the one death reigned through the one, much more those who receive the abundance of grace and the gift of righteousness will reign in life through the one Jesus Christ. Now again, if you take this verse in isolation and some others, you can build doctrines around them that don't teach what the Bible teaches. But if you put them in context and let other verses be brought in that will tell you what this cannot mean, you can't do that. Letting Bible interpret Bible. So then, as though through one transgression there resulted condemnation to all men. Now, okay, did that mean that we all die because Adam sinned once? No, we got to sin too, right? Because all sin. One act of righteousness results in justification of life to all men. Is that teaching universalism? Jesus rose from the dead, we're all going to be saved. No, we've got to choose Jesus even as sinners choose to sin. For as through the one man's disobedience, the many were made sinners, and that's not to be taken as they couldn't help it. It's just a way of talking about an illustration that he's making. Even so, through the obedience of the one, the many will be made righteous. Again, the people who say that we all inherit Adam's sin do not say we all inherit Christ's righteousness. If we're going to go literal with one, let's go literal with both. We can't do that. The law of Moses says, okay, you law of Moses people that are getting all, in fact, chapters 9, 10, and 11 will be devoted.
I just have a question.
I'm not going to fool with the microphone. I'm just coming over here.
So the folks that believe in original sin were born with sin.
Okay. You're born with Adam's sin. Those folks, original sin. And there was an original sin, but that's not what we're talking about.
Exactly. I assume at a certain point you can do something to be free of that original sin.
Well, here's another thing. Okay.
So what do we do with a baby who is born and dies at birth?
They're going to hell, for goodness sakes. It's easy to figure that one out.
Okay.
I mean, you all see that, don't you?
Is that really what they say?
Yes. That's one reason why they baptize infants. Of course, you got to get to them pretty quick.
But what if
I know. Yeah, I know. And since these same people often feel like, and rightfully so, that that's life in the womb, what if they die in the womb?
Well, that's what I'm saying. They wouldn't baptize a deceased infant, would they?
No. So let's just say it caves in on itself, shall we? Okay. Now, if you take a strict, and there's a lot of modified Calvinists. Baptists are modified Calvinists. They don't take all 5 of the tulip points. They believe you have a free will to be saved. In fact, some even free will Baptists. But then they also teach, generally, all of them don't, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, that you can't fall from grace. So if you take a pure Calvinist position, get back in the camera. I shaved and everything before I came. Don't want to let it go to waste. If you're a strict Calvinist, I once had a O.R.N.L. They got a fire over there. I used to teach over there 7 years in the morning, once a week. I'd go over there, check in at the gate, and go teach. And one time we had a strict, it's hard to find them, absolute Calvinist, especially one who would defend it. Now, if you take tulip Calvinism, you, me, are so corrupted because of Adam's sin that we've inherited, that we cannot choose of ourselves to do anything good. I'm not making this up. I asked this gentleman that was in there, I said, "Can you not read about Jesus' sacrifice and appreciate that?" And say, "Man, that's really cool. I want to do that." No. So I said, "Well, what if your house is burning down and somebody comes in and rescues you and your children and your wife, and are you capable of feeling appreciation for them?" And, "Well, yeah." Wait a minute. He said, I can't explain it." No, you can't. Anyway, I'm not making fun of this guy. I'm just saying that if we take a position that won't hold up, then we need to own it, whoever we are. So you have then what is called irresistible grace. If you are one of the elect, you were chosen before people were ever made. You were chosen to be saved for no reason other than that you were chosen. And other people were chosen to be lost for no other reason than that they were chosen to be lost, because that means God retains his sovereignty. And Calvin was all about sovereignty. So then when the time comes for you to be awakened to becoming a Christian, the Holy Spirit will bring God's irresistible grace to you, and you can't do anything about it. If he doesn't, you can't do anything about that. That said, once you become a Christian, one of the elect, you can't do anything to be unelect. Once they've always saved. Well, there you go. How do they know? Because here's the thing. If you are operating in that system and you go bad, you never were saved in the first place. So you don't really know until you die, because you might otherwise go bad if you're one of them or not. So it's got things about it, and holes. And most of it, well, no, a lot of it comes from this. What I believe this is teaching, when we bring in what we need to bring in, let it rule out what it does rule out, and let Paul say what he's saying, not in an isolated verse, but in the entirety of what he's been saying, not only here but elsewhere, is that Adam archetypically was the one who introduced sin into the world. And then people chose by their sins to partake of death. Death spread to all men because all men sinned. Jesus comes in as the other archetypical figure to offer another choice. Salvation by obedience of faith. And that to the Jews who want to talk about law all the time, well, first of all, there were sins counted prior to the law of Moses, so there must have been a standard. And we've already talked about that. All the Gentiles were in sin. The people of the flood got flooded because of that. So Jews don't look at this as, you got some exclusivity on rules and regulations. There were rules in the world before Moses was ever born. But understand this too. When you're talking about the law and everything, it's fine, but the way you use it, let me show you what happens when you use it the way you're using it to earn your salvation. You will sin more with it than you would have without it. So how's about we put the law where it belongs as a guide to faith, never intended to be a way you earn your salvation. Let's let it function that way. Then it can be an advantage to you because you can know more things about God and live a better life. But if you want to do it your way, once and done, you're going to have a lot more dones than the other folks because you got this other stuff you got to do. Okay. I'm done. Anybody want to say anything? I might even let you use a mic. I don't know if they've ever fixed the microphones or not. That's another thing.
Is there any significance to the free gift?
I guess they have. Fred?
I always like looking up words and
There you are.
and see if there's anything interesting in the English language or something we can learn from the Greek word. And I just noted in this section here between 15 and 18 that the word free gift, at least in the English Standard Version, is used 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And I looked up the word free gift, and it's the word charisma.
Yes,
And
yes.
And I know charisma has a kind of a different definition in English than the Greek.
Well, it does. It's got a range. It's got what they call a semantic range. In other words, you look it up in the Greek lexicon, there are things. If you look it up in the English's things, it can mean. And one of the, well, for instance, cosmetology. What's that? You women?
No, it's
Makeup, stuff. It comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means God's adornment of the creation. So you can see a connection there, okay? It has a derived meaning, okay? Charisma, when John Kennedy was debating Richard Nixon on TV first, John was a handsome, charismatic man. Richard, not so much. He was probably a better politician. He probably won the debates. But John Kennedy won the election because he had an unmerited, undeserved pull. So that kind of spins off of that, the free gift thing. Anybody else? Words are, when I was teaching Hebrew and Greek, which I enjoyed, I mean, let me tell you, you don't have to know Hebrew and Greek to go to heaven by any means, but it was just fun. And one of the things I still enjoy, is linguistics. Linguists believe they are the top of the food chain in translation. And in many ways they are. They make fun of people who write things like Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, stuff like that. But so I had a discussion with a friend of mine recently over a man who has written a book about pistis, which is the word for faith. And in that book, he has given it one definition, and he beats it to death. And linguists, when they see that, they say, I agree with his main point, but you can't do that with words. You got to give them their full flexibility. So anyway, I say that to say that what determines what things mean is where they are and what goes around them. We didn't use Greek tonight, but we figured out what was going on with English. And it won't figure anything else out in French or Greek or anything else. The Bible is written in such a way that it is what it is, and you would have to pretty much rewrite the whole stinking thing, or it's going to say what it says. Hence, I became a Christian reading Good News for Modern Man, which was a very liberal, free, basically paraphrase. But I, who didn't get out of high school till I was 20, could understand it. And guess what? What it said about Jesus and being saved was the same thing the King James said. But I understood it. So I am somewhat more charitable about translations in that I realize that they're not even, okay, I'm going to say it. I'm just going to say it. The NIV. When I taught Greek, there was a guy in Maryville who wrote 5 pamphlets on what's wrong with the NIV. So fourth quarter Greek, we were doing translations. I said, let's take his things and let's check and see if what he's saying about it holds up. We found out that some of it did, but most of it was he was wanting it to say what the King James said, and if it didn't, he didn't like it. If you're not careful, I won't buy a coffee for you tomorrow.
I'm glad that you use that word, the intelligence to understand. That's a prayer that I often have to my God. That He's given us the intelligence to understand and glean from the Scriptures.
Exactly.
What we ought to.
The common man can be empowered.
But I don't understand in my own way of reasoning how anybody could misinterpret it, Romans 9 through 15. It seems that it's very plain.
Well,
We are all born into the physical family of Adam. And as a result, we have in our genes, if you want to look at it that way, we have inherited his guilt, the tendency to sin. And you have a choice to make, because the alternative is that
I am a child of Adam in my flesh. And in his flesh he sinned. But in my flesh, I've got to sin myself. Death spread to all men because all men sin. But
all have sinned, and we have a choice.
we do.
We can, through the second Adam, Christ, very plainly.
We have that
we have
ability
the
to say, I'm
choice.
choosing
We either-
life.
We either accept his graciousness, his grace.
And we're not bound and determined to have to choose sin.
Yes.
We can choose. We have free will.
We either choose to go with Christ or we choose to stay with Adam.
That's what that's saying.
Yes, and that, I'm sure that's what you said. And by going
Surely.
with Christ, you trade judgment for righteousness.
Yes. If we choose to cast our lot with Adam and sin, we will wind up where he wound up. Now, it won't be the same sin he committed because he's committing the first sin. We're not doing that. We're just joining in. But if we choose to do that, we get the same consequences he got from his choice. But there is another choice available to us that we have the free will to choose. We are not so corrupt that we can't choose Jesus unless God makes us. Okay, we got Rick back here. Huh? You know, that's right. It's the front two rows are full up with junk. Everybody leaves their stuff up there. So, come on, Rick.
All right, on the business of God predestining everybody. Peter had something to say about that in chapter 3, verse 9. He said, the Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some men count slackness, but is long-suffering to us toward, not willing that any
He doesn't
perish,
want anybody to
but
perish.
that all should come to repentance. Now, does that sound like he's already picked out? And if it's the ones he's picked out,
It doesn't really
ain't-
sound like that,
It
does
don't sound
it?
like it, because he don't have any control over it.
No, no.
So that takes care of that. Now,
So what you'd have is, I want everybody to be saved, but I'm going to make it so only some of them can be. Ha ha.
yeah, in this business of not falling from grace, in chapter 2, verse 20, he says, for if after they have escaped the pollutions of the world through the knowledge of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, they are again entangled therein and overcome.
They must have gotten disentangled, right?
The latter end is worse with them than the beginning. So, and the beginning was unsaved.
There you go. Here, I'm going to give you an argument, and then maybe we'll press on. I don't know. Oh, you turned it on. No, you didn't. There we go. It's okay. Once you're a child, you're always a child. You ever heard that? Okay. Have you ever heard of any child that got disinherited? Were they still a child? Will reading time comes, did they get anything? No. So that argument, practically speaking, in just our everyday life experiences, won't hold water. Who's seen Ben-Hur with Charlton Heston? The rest of you leave the room. No. It's a great movie, great movie. Ben-Hur is a galley slave because his sister knocked a tile off and bonked a Roman guy in the head. And anyway, they put her in jail with her mama, and they get leprosy. I don't want to ruin it for you, but it's really cool. They throw him, he becomes a Roman galley slave. And you are a galley slave till you die. And usually it doesn't take long, but Charlton Heston's much a man, and so he's been rowing for a long time. And Quintus Arrius, the commander of the Roman fleet, is going after pirates. He's on his ship, and the ship gets sunk. And Ben-Hur saves him, and he adopts him. A Jew, adopted by a Roman. And he becomes an inheritor to everything in Quintus Arrius' life. So it can work that way too. You can adopt. What does the Bible ever talk about us being adopted as children? Well, of course. And then we become heirs, joint heirs with Christ. So that's all there. We don't want to wreck it. Let's just let it be what it is. Okay. I'll maybe say only one more thing about Calvinism. I have nothing against Calvinists. I do not. I hope they don't against me. We're all human beings with our problems. But I read a book once by a guy who went all the way through school, got his doctorate, was at a university teaching, and he said one day, because sometimes when you're in something you don't think about it, you just go with it. That's why most people are what they are. He said, I asked myself, I let myself ask myself, what kind of God is that? Because I was told, well, he can do whatever he wants to. I'm thinking, surely the Bible teaches that God has character, integrity, that he wants people to be saved, and he's long-suffering and patient as a result of that. And that's the God I want to serve. But that's not the God I've been serving. I'm out of here. So, there we go. Okay. We might as well ease into chapter 6 a little bit. That's our chapter as well, I know.
What part of strict Calvinism what makes something strict Calvinist versus not strict?
Okay, there are Calvinists who on paper would say they are, but if you bring up a point with them in discussion, they will say, there's a lady I had a very nice discussion with about the problems of Calvinism right after I was converted, and she said, I never believed all that anyway. So I have learned that people you have to deal with on a case-by-case basis. When I taught denominational doctrines, I made sure that everything I taught about a denomination was what the denominational people taught about themselves. I didn't want to get it secondhand. I wanted them to say it so I could talk about what they said. But there are people in every religious group, who don't ascribe to everything they're supposed to. Chapter 6. Okay, come on, join me. Just come on up, people.
So I have a new neighbor.
Still don't recognize him.
I have a new neighbor, and he's from China. Speaks a little bit of English. And I was talking to my neighbor about him, and they're Baptist. He's a Baptist preacher, and the wife was telling me that they talked to him about going to church. And said the man from China said, oh, I'm a Christian. Mm-hmm. And she says, I just wonder if he's a Christian or if he's just saying he's a Christian because he's in the United States.
And who knows? You could pursue that.
You know, a lot of people in their denominations are that way. They're just saying that because that's where they are.
Most people are where they are because that's where they are.
Because the family's been there or friends are there, they just go. We did that when we first got the Church of Christ.
Okay. Well, most people, when they get baptized, they don't know a whole lot of what they're getting themselves into, do they? Which is okay at that point because you go, oh man, we're not going to get to chapter 6. That's fine. It's okay. Chapter 6 is obviously going to deal with baptism. Chapter 6 is not primarily there to talk about baptism. Chapter 6 assumes that people he's never seen before have certain beliefs about baptism because everybody that calls himself a Christian does. So that makes